Hey, welcome along to this online Arise Care resource. We're so grateful that you joined us here today, and we're so excited because today we're going to be learning about well-being and mental health. We're so honored to have the one and only Richard Black sharing with us today. So make sure you find a comfy seat, get ready to take some notes, and enjoy this content.
So let's look at our next topic, one on managing your mind. You see, the mind is the place where you live, although you may not have realized that. Many people just have their different thoughts, their feelings, and they're not necessarily conscious of them. They just sort of live through them. And which is all well and good, and which is all fine when what's going on in your mind seems to be supporting you, seems to be encouraging you, seems to be helping you. But at times, as we know, our minds can run amok. Our minds can run ahead of us. Our minds can, at times, overwhelm us. And we can often feel like we're powerless to do anything but manage it and get through. But how do we help our minds to come back? To come back from wherever they've wandered off to come back from places where they've got trapped and got caught that aren't helping us, that are hurting us or even harming us. I want us to have a look at some of the tools around that. You see, there was a guy called John Milton who once said, "The mind is its own place, and in itself, it can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven." And when you think about that, what it's talking about is that the mind is a place. It's a place that's actually separate from reality. I don't know if you've picked up on that. The mind that you live in, the way that you see things, the way that you think about things, it's not saying that's necessarily that there's anything wrong with that. It's just letting you know that it is different. It is separate from what reality actually is. And so what happens at times in people's mind, like what John Milton is pointing out, is that people can go through hellish experiences. They can go through trauma and tragedy, and yet there seems to be some optimism, some joy, some resilience that's still inside of them. Whereas other people seemingly have everything and anything that a person could want. But what's going on inside of them is a place of torment and fear and darkness. You know, I remember back when we had the earthquakes here in Canterbury, and I would talk with people who had lost their house and were dealing with EQC, and we were just starting to work out how much fun dealing with EQC really was. And yet, despite the fact that they'd lost their house, despite the fact that they were working with EQC, when you listened to them, there was a sense of optimism. There was a sense of buoyancy. There was a sense of gratitude that they still had in their life. And then there'd be other people that I'd speak with who were at a different part of the city, and their houses remained strong and nothing really happened to them, and their marriage was fine, their job was fine, their kids were fine. There was all of that was fine. But when you spoke to them, something had shifted inside of them where they seemed to become far more despondent, far more depressed, and had lacked a sense of hope and a sense of encouragement. Now, why is that when they have seemingly everything they would need? Because the mind is its own place, and it can do some weird and wonderful things with what's going on in reality. There's another guy called Epictetus who once said many hundreds of years ago, "People are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them." In other words, people aren't so much disturbed. The disturbing factor isn't so much about what happens, but the meaning they take from that, the conclusions they take from that. And so, I mean, you could see that when you take two people who have been made redundant, and you speak to one person, and the meaning they take from that is, this is the end. This is hopeless now, that I'm stuffed, that I'm going to be financially ruined, that this is horrible. Whereas you speak to someone else who's been made redundant, and for them there's that sense of buoyancy. There's a sense of, hey, yeah, I didn't want that to happen, but this is the start of something new. This is the start of my next chapter. There's a sense that, sure, that I can't necessarily change what has been, that chapter has now finished, but I still get to write the next chapter. And so that the view they take of that situation of being made redundant, the meaning they take from that is very different, and as a result, it affects their overall mental and emotional well-being. Another person once said, we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. In other words, we're seeing reality, we're seeing events through the lens of who we are. Now, you see, right now, as I stand here and I talk with you, I'm seeing you through corrective lenses, these glasses that I'm wearing. And if I was to take them off and look at you now, well, now you just look a whole lot better than you did before. Now what I see is I see more fuzzy images, blurry images. And I could say that I'm seeing you accurately. I'm seeing you with my own eyes. I'm making an honest assessment of who you are. But the problem is I'm not seeing reality. I'm not seeing you as you actually are. I'm seeing you through how my eyes, my lenses will allow me to see you. And so if I think that this is reality, then the world might seem very fuzzy to me, even scary and filled with dark shadows. And it's not until I put on what are called corrective lenses that I can see all of your fine lines. I can see all of the intricacies of your face. I can see you far more accurately. But in order to do that, in order to help my physical eye see you accurately, I need what's called corrective lenses. And sometimes with our mind, with the way that our mind is causing us to see things, the meaning our mind is taking of things, sometimes we've actually got to put on what we might call a corrective lens so that we can see more accurately. And yet it's not how we've always seen. It won't be familiar to us, but we will be seeing far more accurately. And it may take time for our mental eyes to adjust so that it becomes far more familiar. But that's just time that it will take. You see, the problem is that as we look through our eyes, our physical eyes, but as we also look through our mental eyes, to use that kind of language, we see the world a certain way. We have a certain perspective of the world. And what we tend to do, because we're human, is we tend to believe what our perspective is telling us. We tend to believe what our eyes are seeing. We tend to believe the way that we see and sense this world. So one of the images that I often like to use is this one. Because the problem is that with our perspective is that things are not always what they seem. Because when you look at an image like that, tell me, what's your first automatic response as to who's carrying who? What would you say? What does it look like? Yeah, it looks like she's carrying him and he's the one with his knees up and his black tights on and his flowery shoes, and she's the one with these big loafer shoes on. And of course, as we look at that, and as your eye and your perspective looks at that, you go, well, that's odd. But then, of course, when you take a closer look, what you see is that she's wrapped around the other side of his body. And that, in fact, he is carrying her, but he's carrying her under one arm. And you see, the problem with our perspective is that we believe our perspective. We believe the way we're seeing and thinking and feeling about things. But oftentimes our perspective just isn't accurate. It's not what it seems to be. And you see, so the problem with our perspective is that sometimes it can hurt us and harm us. But other times it actually does help us. Sometimes it limits us, other times it frees us. Because your perspective can take something that seems quite minor and make it seem monumental. You start to go into a kind of catastrophizing state, that this is huge, that this is horrible, that we're running late again, and I've still got to get the kids in the car, but no, one of them has to go off to the toilet, one of them still has to find the shoes. After everything that I've done to try to get them in, all they had to do was one simple thing, and they couldn't manage that. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but that's known as catastrophizing. And so our perspective can take something that's quite minor and make it seem quite monumental. But also our perspective can take something that is major, that is monumental, and make it seem manageable. As you realize the resources that you have, as you break things down into one step and then the next step, as you realize that actually you've come through difficulties like this before. So your perspective is critical to how you will interpret the world, to how you will respond to the world. We just need to keep making sure that our perspective is serving us and not working against us. And of course, you don't know to do that if you've been living in your mind and you've been working with your own thoughts and feelings as if they are reality. They're not. Your thoughts and feelings are based on your perspective, your interpretation of reality, the meaning that you take from reality. There's a guy called Sean Acker who heads up an organization on happiness, well-being, those kinds of things. And he's done an absolutely fabulous TED Talk, if you ever want to take a look at it. But in that TED Talk, one of the things that he says is this. You see, what we're finding, and he works in the area of positive psychology, what we're finding is that it is not necessarily reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world. That shapes your reality. That is your perception of reality. And if we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, but we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. Now that is a huge statement, but I think he's right. When we change the lens by which you look through, the perspective by which you look through, we can begin to change not only your happiness, but every single educational and business outcome at the same time. And so to take a look at our mind, some of the things that we need to understand that can trap us are these. I don't know if you've heard the stories about how they train circus elephants to stay put, because they are giant beasts that can pretty much go through anything and everything they want to. But one of the things that they do is that when they get a baby elephant, which is still quite a significant beast, but when they get a baby elephant, they start by chaining it to a 6-foot stake. They slam it into the ground, they chain the baby elephant to it, so as the baby elephant pulls against this chain, it doesn't matter how much it pulls and pulls and pulls against this chain, it's going nowhere. And so, of course, what it learns, what it begins to believe, what it takes on board as a result, is that I'm powerless to this chain. This chain is stronger than me. It is futile to try to even move the chain. Now, of course, as the baby elephant grows up, they replace the 6-foot stake with a 6-inch peg. And then it's the baby elephant that's now grown up and become a full-size elephant, feels the tug of the chain of the rope around its leg. It knows, I'm powerless. This is too big for me. It's futile to try. And so the elephant's brain has been conditioned to know that it must stay put, that it can't break free from this. And yet the reality is that if the elephant just took some further key strides, it would rip that stake out of the ground and it would be off. And you see, my friends, there are many things that may have gone on in your life where you unwittingly have been conditioned to believe you're powerless. It's futile to try. I can't change anything. This is who I am. And is that the reality and the truth? No. But you've been conditioned to believe that. That when something was massive and huge in your life, when something perhaps overwhelming and even traumatic happened in your life, it felt like a 6-foot stake in the ground that told you, you can't move, this is who you are, it is futile to go against this belief, this thought, and try to be anything different. And maybe you've had other things that have happened in your life that have confirmed that tells you, stay put. It's your confirmation bias coming up again. You don't want it to be there, you don't mean it to be there, you don't recognize that it's being there, but it's still there, and you don't realize that until you find the skills, the tools to learn, how do I take that next step and rip this sucker out of the ground? You see, one of the things that I find as a counselor, as I'm talking with people and we go back into issues in their childhood, and we come back often to their school days. Poor old teachers get the blame for a whole bunch of things. But there'll be some that will tell me, they'll say, you know what, in my life as I was growing up, I thought I was doing all right. But then one of the teachers said to me, oh, you're such a stupid kid. And at that point I realized, I'm really not very good academically. And I could see as I looked at some of my results that it was telling me that I truly am not great at academically. And so now what I find is that when I go to think about expanding or move into careers that I want, and I think, yeah, but I'm going to have to study. And all it's going to show me is that I'm dumb, that I can't handle this, that I don't belong here, that these people are far beyond anything that I can manage. And as soon as they hear a big word, they go, you see, shouldn't be here. This is all too hard for me. And they shut down. There'll be other people that I'll meet that will say, do you know what? I had one of those teachers where I was going through life, my home life sucked in a big way, but I was just trying to get by and I did my schoolwork, and one of the teachers said to me, do you know what? We're so pleased we've got you. You're one of the smartest kids in the class. And at that point, I remember them saying, you know, it's like a light came on. And I thought, really? I am? And I just realized I knuckled down and I worked better, and my scores, my grades just took off. And now I realize, thanks to that teacher, hey, I'm willing to give anything a go. I'm willing to give it a go. I'm willing to try it out, because you know what? Even if I fail and stuff it up, I know I am intelligent, successful, and if it's not this, it will be something else. It's the power of one statement that was believed. You see, in one sense, you're only as smart or dumb, to use those poor language, as you believe you are. Whereas, of course, as most teachers will know, as most people in education will know, it's not always what is deemed to be the smart ones that succeed, but those who are willing to get familiar with the topic and persevere and find ways to answer questions that they have and not be afraid to ask those questions. Get familiar with the topic, persevere, and get the resources that you need. And as you start to do that, you find you start to rip out pegs that have been holding you back. Now that's just true in one area of your life, like an educational area, in an academic area. But you could be being held back in a number of areas. You could be thinking poorly of yourself, limiting yourself in a number of areas, lest you try and have it confirmed that you really were what you thought you were in the beginning, when you're not. So we need to understand, why are we thinking, why are we feeling the way that we are currently? A lot of it has to do with the way that we've been conditioned, the way that we've understood things. You see, there's a guy called Roger Bannister. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is a legend. He is a star when it comes to running the mile in under 4 minutes, the sub 4 minute mile. You see, in athletics many, many years ago, and ongoingly, this was one of those benchmarks, those goals, those challenges that they had, to try to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And the thing was that they were doing this year after year after year after year after year, trying and trying and trying, and no one could do it. So much so that they started to have conversations around, maybe it's physically impossible for a human to run a mile under 4 minutes. Maybe we're just fooling ourselves. Maybe we're trying to do something that is the impossible, and all we're doing is winding ourselves up. And so that was part of the beliefs that was going on, part of the conversation that was going on, until such time as Roger Bannister in 1954 did it. And he ran the mile in under 4 minutes. And my friends, with that, guess what changed in everyone's thinking? It's possible. And going from no one ever being able to do it, no one ever doing it in the history of humanity, at least in the recorded history of humanity, from that point on, people started doing it. Later that year, the year wasn't even out, and someone else did it. And then another person did it, and another person did it. And now, running a mile in under 4 minutes, if someone did it, it's not newsworthy. It's commonplace. Well, at least it's commonplace amongst the peak athletes. I don't think I'm going to be doing it anytime soon. But you see, what was holding people back was a belief. But a belief based on what we are experiencing. It seems to be common for us to believe that it's impossible for us to run a mile in under 4 minutes. Why? Because no one's done it. I mean, that's surely pretty solid evidence. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for anyone to do it. You see, oftentimes it's the belief, it's the peg that's locked into the ground that's holding back your understanding and your thinking of who you are and even what you're able to achieve. You know, back in World War II, what was discovered was something also known as the placebo effect. At least it was put into practice in the medical world. That there was a doctor called Henry Beecher, and he was working on his patients who were brought in from front lines. And at one point, they ran out of morphine. And so one of the things that he did was he hooked up a saline drip, but he told all of his patients that this is morphine. You're still feeling a bit sore? You're still feeling the pain? Let's kick it in. Let's get that morphine drip going. And as he conveyed and spoke to the patients, their pain levels dropped down. They went to sleep and dropped off. At least with 50%, up to about 50% of the people that happened of the patients. Now, all he was putting into them was saline. There was no morphine. So why was their pain dropping? Why were they able to fall asleep and get rest? Because their mind made it true. Now, in one sense, in science today, in research and pharmacology, they want to minimize and to be able to locate what they call the placebo effect, to make sure that a drug can work beyond the placebo effect, to make sure there's really some active ingredients in it. But if we just pause that conversation, we've got to ask, why is there even a placebo effect? How does that even work? Because your mind makes it so. And that's really just to say that your mind is powerful. Your mind is significant. And what your mind believes, your body starts to experience. What your mind believes will shape and open up whether you can move ahead in life, whether you can move into certain careers and jobs or conversations, or whether you are more resilient towards certain pressures and challenges and obstacles that you face. It's the power of what your mind makes it to be. It's the power of belief. Do you know, I remember when I was a 15-year-old boy here in Christchurch, and I got introduced in many ways to this concept. And one of the teachers showed me this exercise, which I've picked up and I still use today. And what he did, and what I do usually, but I won't do it with you today, is get a person up here and they put their arms out to the side. And then they have another person standing behind them. And they say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hands on your wrists. And my job is to push your hands down by your side. And your job is to resist my hands. And so as we do that, as the person does that, and they stand there and we push their wrist down, you notice, depending on how strong they are and depending how long their levers are, because I've got short arms, we're able to sort of move their arms down by their side. And then I'll say, now what I want you to do is I want you to put your arms out again, but I want you to say out loud in front of everybody here and say over and over again, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak. And so that's what they start doing. And as they do it and they say it and they say it and they say it, and I go, okay, now I'm going to put your arms down by your side again. And I go, whoomph. And their arms go down very quickly. And I say, now just to check that this wasn't because the person's arms were tired, we're going to do it a third time. But as you put your arms out this time, what I want you to say out loud is, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong. So they'll do that. And then when I go to put their arms down, it's really, really hard to get them down. The hardest point in getting their arms down by their sides is the third time, when seemingly they should be the most tired. And in the third time, it's the hardest and they're the strongest. Why? Because they've said out loud, I'm strong, I'm strong. And get this, this isn't even based on what they are believing. This is just based on what they are saying. Imagine if we were to mess with what they genuinely believed. And so part of that's to say is that in one regard, your body, your brain listens to what your mind is saying. And if you're saying to yourself, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I can't manage this, this is too hard, do you know what? Your body, your brain, your being listens to you and says, fair enough, and shuts down. But when there is a sense of optimism, confidence, that you encourage yourself, your body, your brain, your being listens to you, and strength emerges. Greater confidence, ability emerges. And that's just with what you're saying. We haven't even yet dealt with your deep belief. So hopefully you're getting a picture and understanding of just how powerful the mind is and how we can be conditioned and influenced one way or the other that either serves us or works against us. See, let me take you a bit further, a bit deeper. Let's have a look at the way the mind is and what goes to make up our mind and our understanding. And oftentimes there is one image that's used of the mind is the iceberg. I don't know if you've heard this or seen this before, where you have a look at an iceberg. Now, of course, we only see a part of it sticking up above the water. What percentage would you say we see sticking up above the water? Just call it out. 10%, 1/3, someone else? 2/3? What else? 50%? Yeah, I have no idea. But what we know is that it's only ever a portion that sticks up above the water, don't we? That the bulk of what's taking place is below the surface. And the reason why there's a bit sticking above is because there's a bulk underneath that's propping it up and sticking it above the water as it floats there. Now you see, in many ways, that's a good example, a good analogy of our mind and the way our mind works. You see, there are many different layers to us. That there's a surface level of what we see, but the bulk of what is going on in us is below the surface. It's below our conscious experience. So the first part, the top part of us, the most obvious part of us, is our behavior. Now the behavior is what comes from you. That is in what you do, but also in what you don't do. It's in small things that you do in the now, but it's also in the big decisions that you make. So what I mean by that is it might be in the sense that what's your behavior? Your behavior is where you reach out a hand to shake a person. Your behavior is where you fold your arms when someone's trying to come near you. Your behavior is that you yell at someone when you feel upset. Your behavior is when you go quiet, you go silent, you shut off from someone. But your behavior can also be the career you chose, Your behavior can be the person that you chose to marry. Your behavior can be the place that you chose to live, the big places. And you see, if we understand that our behavior is that which comes from me and that what I do and also what I choose not to do. Now, if we go down one more layer, we come to the area known as your feelings. And in many ways, your feelings are what propel you into doing what you do. That your feelings, if we called them your emotions, your energy that creates motion inside of you, it's what causes you to act the way you do. Because if I was to ask you, if you were feeling anxious or a person was feeling anxious, what kinds of behavior might come from that person who's feeling anxious? Again, just call it out. What do you think? Their fear, and that's the feeling, but what would be the behavior that we would see coming from a person who's feeling that way? They might cry. What else? Fidgeting. Great. What else? No eye contact. What was that back here? Withdrawing. Yeah. So as part of it, that's just the easiest thing to do. If you're feeling anxious, fidget, withdraw, don't make eye contact, shut off. But if we flip that round and we said a person was feeling joyful, tell me what might be the sort of behavior that you see coming from them now? Smiling? Yeah. What else? Chatty? Yeah. They can become quite verbose. What else? There's a bounce in their step. Yeah. Great. Anything else? Yeah, they can become chatty. There's a bounce in their step. They may become more huggy when they're happy. They may become more generous when they're happy and they're feeling joyful. You see, those sort of behaviors are just easy to come out of you because you're feeling a certain way. Now, we don't always have to go with our feelings. Sometimes we go against our feelings. Now, I don't know if there's anyone here. Has anyone here ever been in customer service? When you're on front line and you're dealing with public, so there's a few of you. Now, you will understand the power and the importance at times of going against your feelings, where you've got one of those people who come and they say, there's a problem with this, or I'm not happy with that, and so your behavior is, I'm really sorry, sir, I'm really sorry, madam, I'm sure we can put that right. But internally what you're thinking is, you plonker, I don't get paid enough to put up with you, go away. Yeah, I dislike people like you. But on the surface, you're appearing a very different way. Teachers often feel this way. Now, it's just to say that our feelings push us in a certain direction, and so it's easier to behave that way. Now, if we went down another layer, we would come to the area known as your thinking or your self-talk. And your brain is constantly chattering away to you. It's constantly speaking to you. It's speaking to you as you go to work, or you go off to a mother's group, or you go to the gym. It's speaking to you as you arrive home, or as you're doing the chores, or you're doing the shopping, or you're engaged in a project. Your brain is constantly speaking to you. It's speaking to you as you sit here and as you listen to me. And as some of you might be going, these chairs are really comfortable, I think I'm going to go to sleep. As other people might be thinking, I really should have gone to the loo before this. As other people are thinking, this was really interesting. Other people are thinking, how did that guy get to be so good looking? I mean, you could be thinking all manner of things. And your brain is constantly chattering. I remember reading somewhere where it says that your brain is speaking to you at the speed or the rate of 1,200 or 1,300 words per minute. Now, how they measure that, I have no idea. But what we can agree on is it's a lot. And you see, what you are telling yourself, what you are chattering away in your mind, is going to influence how you feel, and it's going to influence what you do. And you see that chatter, I mean, if you are telling yourself, I've stuffed it, I'm useless, I'm no good, I hate myself, I mean, how easy is it to feel happy, joyful, encouraged? It's really hard. Equally, if you come up against obstacles and you're telling yourself, I've got this, I've got resources, I'm good, I've got friends around me, we can do this, I can manage this, I can overcome, then how easy is it to feel depressed? Well, it's just a whole lot harder. because your thoughts tell your body what kinds of feelings to create, and then your feelings propel you into acting. And you see, that's the kind of waterline. That's the beginning of what we see sticking up above the surface. And if you can monitor and notice your behaviors, the way you engage and the way you avoid and what you do there, if you can start to manage and notice your feelings and what's really going on inside, and if you can start to even listen into your thoughts, you start to be miles ahead than the general public. One of the first steps, as we will look at, for mental emotional well-being is listen to what you're telling yourself. Listen into how you're speaking to yourself. You know, and if you're not speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a best friend, it's time to change the chatter, because your mind needs to be your best friend. Now, if we go below the water level, we come to an area of belief, of what you're believing to be true about yourself, about others, about the world, and that's where you're more conscious. You know, if I was to ask you about those beliefs are pretty easy for you to recognize and name. But if we go down another level, we come to a different type of belief, your assumptions, or what I often refer to as your deep belief. That below all the water level, below the surface, below what you're telling yourself, we come to the area of what you are believing to be true. And more often than not, it's in the I am of what you're believing to be true about you. I am powerless. I am rejected. I am a stuff-up. I am a failure. Whatever it may be. And that, of course, begins to influence what you believe, what you start to tell yourself, how you start to feel, and how you start to behave. That assumption base, that deep belief base, that is the lens through which you look, through which you interpret the world, and everything else begins to flow from that. I have a friend who uses as an example that I've pinched from him, and he says, you know, although it's not very commonplace these days, he said, if you imagine someone running through the airport, pushing through the crowds, there are not crowds at the moment, pushing through the crowds to clamor to get to the front of the counter, if that's the behavior that you see, what's the person feeling, do you think? They might be feeling anxious, panicky. And if we go down another layer and we say, so what are they thinking? What are they telling themselves? It might be, you're an idiot. You should have set your alarm clock. You should have plugged in your alarm clock. Why did traffic have to be so bad? What are they believing? I'm going to miss the plane. And then I'll take that further and I'll say, so Tal, let's talk about that. Let's imagine you're going to miss the plane. I'm going to ask you what will seem like a weird question, but the reason why it's a weird question is because we're going deeper below the water level. Tell me, what would be so bad if you were to miss the plane? And there's a tool known as the 5 whys. In other words, you have to ask why 5 times to really get to the true issue. Now, whether you have to ask why 5 times, 4 times, 6 times, it really doesn't matter. The aim is that you're getting below the surface. And when I'll ask that of people, and what would be so bad if you missed the plane? Do you know what I find most people say, or often they'll say is, because I'm going to miss the wedding, and it's my wedding. And I'm thinking, that's a really odd response. I mean, why is it that you're in a different city before your wedding day? I mean, was this a stag do gone wrong? But whether it's that I'm going to miss the plane, I'm going to miss my own wedding, or I'm going to miss the funeral, I'm going to miss the events. So sometimes it's around the missing of things. Other times it's around it's going to cost me more and I don't have the money. And when we go lower and lower below that, and if I say, so what if you missed that? So what if you missed that? And people would be angry, and people would be upset, and people would not like me. And what would be so bad about that? Well, you see, they would be rejecting me. You see, my worth is in their hands. They determine whether I'm okay or not. And if you're believing deep down in the basement level of your mind that other people determine whether you're okay, that other people determine whether you got worth or value, you can see how vulnerable you will be. Or equally, it might be that they go down and they think, I'm going to have to pay and I don't have the money and this is going to be financial ruin and I'm never going to be able to live in a house again, I'm going to be on the street. They go into their own kind of catastrophizing. So when we look at that and we go, wow, if you're actually believing that, I could see why you would be in a panic kind of state. But actually, how likely is that? How true is that? Oh, yeah, I guess it's not. But you see, what you believe deep down in the basement level, that's going to influence what you tell yourself, how you feel, and what you do. And the good news is that when we go down and we start to examine what's there, we can change what's there. So let me give you a tool in how to do this. I'm going to give you 4 A's in realigning your thinking and helping your mind work with you and serve you. And in many ways, in dialing down what can be called the inner critic and help you to dial up your inner coach. And I made sure they all began with A, so I want you to be really impressed with that because it took me a lot of effort to make sure they all began with A. So let's have a look at this. The first one of these A's is that you need to be aware of your feelings and your thoughts. Too often people are running on autopilot. You're just thinking, you're just feeling, you're not engaged. Even your thoughts and your feelings are below the water level for you. But we need to be able to listen in. What are you thinking? What are you telling yourself? And so one key tool, one key exercise I'd get you to do leaving this place as you head to lunch, as you go off back home, as you go to work, as you're listening to election results, as you're doing any of those kinds of things, what are you telling yourself? Become aware of it is a key. You see, as we think about our thoughts and we think about our feelings, we need to notice what's there. Because what I find is that when it comes to our thought life and when it comes to our feeling life especially, we can fall into one of 2 traps. Some people move down one end of the spectrum and they like to indulge their feelings. And I don't mean that in any kind of judgmental way. It's just where they are. They like to marinate in their mood. They marinate in their feelings, whatever's going on for them. So if they're feeling a feeling, they like to feel the feeling. They like to sit with the feeling. And they like to bring other people in to feel what they're feeling. And if you really cared about me, you would feel what I'm feeling. You'd hear my feeling and you'd feel my feeling with me. And don't tell me that my feelings aren't valid. I want to feel my feeling and we'll feel our feelings together. And so that's people that we might say will take an indulge kind of approach to their feelings. But down the other end of the spectrum, we've got people who like to deny their emotions, that they even have emotions. I've counseled a number of men who have practically said to me, mate, I've never come across an emotion in my life and I don't plan to start now. And so what they do in their denial of their emotions, they've built a wall between them and anything they feel. So anytime they start to feel something, they know, throw it over the fence. These feeling things, these emotion things that other people like to talk about, I mean, that's just navel gazing. That's just a bit confusing. I don't want to enter into that because if you start talking about emotions and how you feel, you may never come up. So we know if I see a feeling, if I notice a feeling, I'll put it over the fence so I don't feel it. I mean, you can poke me, you can prod me, but I'm practically numb from the neck down. And of course, what the people who are in the denying of whatever I'm thinking or feeling, no, we just put that out of mind. No, I'm just not going there. No, I'm just not going to feel that. What they don't realize is that denying your thoughts and your feelings is often just a different version of indulging them. Now, why is that? As people are horrified because they've spent their life numbing themselves. And you see, because the emotion, the feeling is still there. It's still driving you. It's still bullying you. You see, in the same way that if you had a broken ankle and we jammed you full of an anesthetic, you could walk on that broken ankle, but it would be broken bone grinding on broken bone. And the same is true with our thoughts and our emotions, that when we deny them, they simply end up influencing us in a very different way. And so we pretend that we're okay or that it isn't an issue until, of course, it spills out, explodes out, and we realize it was just we were in denial. So the place where we want to begin in our awareness is we want to simply be honest about what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, whatever is going on inside of that. Let me notice my thoughts. Let me notice what I'm feeling here. And it's not so that I'll get carried away with it, and nor will I necessarily shut them away. But if I'm going to do anything with them, I first of all have to be honest that they are there. And what is there? Then I can work with them. So the first key thing is, let's be aware of what we are feeling and what we are thinking. The second thing that we need to do after we're honest is arrest our thoughts and feelings. Let's not allow them to carry on. We want to make sure that this is actually what I want. So a good question to ask yourself as you've got different thoughts flooding through your mind, as you've got different feelings that are inside of you, as you have noticed, as you become aware of that, the next thing to ask yourself is this helping me, or is this in fact hurting me? We want to grab a hold of it. And this is where we'll often find that there's a lot of our inner critic, thoughts that are damning us, that are dumping on us, that are beating up on us. And so as a result, one of the things that psychologists refer to these as is they say that the brain can get very prone to what's known as ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. That the ants can come out, that our mind in many ways can be more prone to ants, to the negative. Because for some reason as humans, we tend to believe that which seems negative over anything that seems positive. Some reason, whatever we're telling ourselves that's negative, that's against us, we put validity on that and we believe that must be true. But if there's anything that's encouraging, that's supportive, we go, again, if you really knew me, you'd know that's not true about me. We dismiss it. But we've got to notice the ants to take them captive, to arrest them. You see, I remember many years ago, my wife and I lived in the North Island. We were living in the Wellington region in Upper Hutt. And they had actual ants. So you had to put everything in the fridge. You know, here in Canterbury, we don't really have too many ants. It's too cold. It kills them off. There's at least one benefit for living in Canterbury. And I remember at one point where my wife had made this gorgeous banana cake covered in chocolate icing with chocolate hail. And we had a slice of it, and it was delicious. And so we're sitting down, we're eating this, and then we sort of have that sort of look that we pass between each other, which, without saying, is, do you want another piece? And I think, don't mind if I do. And so we get up and we go back into the kitchen to have another piece of this gorgeous banana cake. And of course, what do we see? But a trail of ants leading all the way to the cake. And my friends, do you realize that chocolate hail and an ant look surprisingly similar? And you know, in banana cakes, that thread of banana looks surprisingly like squashed ants. So we're picking things out. Is this an ant? Is this chocolate ale? Is this banana? Is this an ant? You know, what is this? And then we realize, it all gets too hard, and so we have to dump the whole cake. It was a grieving moment for us. But you see, in many ways, that's what these ants, these automatic negative thoughts do in our life. They scurry through your mind and they rob you of the joy, the peace, the confidence that is yours, that is rightfully yours. And so we need to take captive, we need to arrest these ants, these thoughts, to make sure, is this in fact helping me or harming me? Is this serving me or working against me? As my mind speaking to me the way I would speak to my best friend? Or does it need to be changed? And so with that, we can take that captive, we can arrest that ant. We can squish that ant that was heading towards my cake. But of course, let me ask you, with every ant that you see, how many do you not see? Hundreds, eh? And so we want to also follow the ants back down to the nest. And like I was talking to you before, when we start asking those 5 whys, when we start asking, so what, what's so bad, what am I thinking, why is that an issue for me, we start to come back to the nest. And the nest, in many ways, to kick in with that analogy, that diagram I was using before, The nest are the deep beliefs that we have. And so that's where we've got to come back to. And when we can follow that down, when we're honest, when we don't allow the thoughts, the feelings to run amok, we can now choose what are we going to do against them, to do with them, I should say. How are we going to help our mind in a different way? And this is where we need to, once we've gone down and we found out what's there, now we need to answer the thoughts with truth. We need to find something that's useful here. And just to pick up on that, one of the things I'll say is that we need to make sure that the answers that we're giving to ourselves are real answers and not just right answers. Now, you see the difference between a real answer and a right answer. A right answer is something that will speak up here to my logical self. But a real answer is something that I feel like I can connect with, I can absorb, I can engage. Because at times, when we're trying to encourage one another, or we're even trying to encourage ourselves, we can give platitudes, we can give cliches. Hey, I'm sure it's going to all be fine. Hey, I wouldn't worry about it. Hey, you'll be okay. Hey, you're really a great person. And at that point you go, yeah, I know, but. And we need to actually discover what's a real answer here. I remember working with a number of people who were learning to do public speaking, and they were freaking out. They were getting quite anxious every time they stood up to do public speaking. And as I sat with them and I worked with them, I said, so tell me what's going on here? And they said, oh, well, I guess I just get so nervous. I get so anxious in front of people. It's just the way I am, they said. And at times people can deviate off to naming and explaining their thought life as if it's their personality. And I'll have to break it to many people. Did it ever occur to you this isn't your personality? This is your prison cell. And it's time to walk out of it. So when you think about what's going on inside of you, tell me what's happening. They go, well, I don't want to stuff up. I don't want to make a fool of myself. I go, I get that. And they go, look, I know. It'll all be okay. Everyone goes through this. And I go, well, that's true. That's great. Is that helping you? Yeah, no. Not at all. And I said, so tell me what's going on in your mind. And they might say things like, well, as I'm standing here, I'm worried that I'm going to lose my place. Yeah, and what would be so bad about that? Well, then I'm going to look like I'm an idiot. Okay, and what would be so bad about that? Well, I guess that everyone will be against me or that I'll humiliate myself. And if I go, and what would be so bad about that? And they go, no, that's pretty much it. That's the worst part. Okay, so we're there. And I said, so tell me, let's get a better perspective here. I said, when you are standing up and you're talking in front of people, you're worried that people are going to say, you've stuffed it, you've done a bad job, we don't want you again. Yeah. I said, so tell me, how many times have people said that to you? None. Really? None? So this has never happened to you? No, never. I want you just to connect with that. No one has ever said that. And I said, so let's flip this around, because do you know what I find? I find that we know the truth and how to answer this stuff for other people. We just don't know it for ourselves. So I said, so imagine you are sitting in the audience and there's a person like you speaking up front and they fluff it. They lose their place. Tell me, what's going on in your mind? Oh, I'm just thinking, you go girl, you go boy, you're doing a great job. I think this is excellent. I'm just for you. I know this isn't easy, is it? Yeah, it's difficult, but you can still get there. I mean, that's what would be going on inside of me. I said, great. And that's because you're a thoughtful, kind human being. And I said, so if we flip that around, if I said, as you're standing in front of all those people, if everyone else was having the response to you that you would have to someone speaking, that they're thinking, hey, you go, keep going, you're doing great, this isn't easy, we're for you. Tell me, if you imagined that, what would that be like? Oh, that's a lot better. Yeah, it is, isn't it? And in that, if you are now assuming and seeing, and again, we're not just trying to sweet talk you, we're trying to get you to have an accurate understanding of the way most people are going to be responding to you. and realize that people are for you and not against you in this, that people are encouraging you and with you. You see, as we now connect to the real answer, change happens. And one of the other differences between a right answer and a real answer is the speed at which you connect with it. You see, as in our Western society and our information overload society, we're used to picking up information bits and going, yep. But when it comes to change happens in the slow. And when you're picking up all this information and when you're telling yourself, oh, look, it'll be okay, oh, look, they're actually for me, all that, and you're doing that in a fast way, it will bounce off the surface. But you actually have to slow yourself down and take some of those things that might be a right answer and sit with them and ponder them and consider them and reflect on them and meditate on them and marinate in them and ask yourself, if this was actually true, how would things seem different? What would be different for me? And so that you can make a connection with a different perspective, rather than just allowing the information to bounce off. So that's the third side. The fourth one here is then we actually need to do something about it. So when you've now got a better sense, you've got a better perspective, now you need to put it into practice in knowing this, in seeing things differently, in arresting those thoughts and checking them and seeing what they're saying when they're unhelpful and bringing in a better perspective and more helpful things. Even if I start to say it before I believe it, that can be helpful. But now, if I was to truly believe this, if I was to see this in this way, if I did have this perspective, tell me, how would you now act? What would you do? Because we have to put this new way of understanding into action to help shift the way our brain has been thinking and acting. If you've been so conditioned to operate in a certain way, it's going to be natural, even when you start to change your thoughts, to default into the old way of being. So we need to change your mental state and what you're telling yourself and how you're speaking to yourself and what you're believing, as well as what you're doing. So what would be a constructive thing for me to do? What would be a constructive thing for me to put this into place? What am I needing here? And so as I start to become aware of my thoughts and feelings, arrest them, answer them with truth, answer them with a better perspective, and apply it, a shift begins to happen. Now, I also need to put a disclaimer in here. What I'm giving you here is a tool for the general day-to-day mental thoughts that can be helpful and unhelpful in your mind. There are some issues that are just too big for you. You know, in the same way that no one expects you to do your own root canal, but people do expect you to brush your teeth at least a couple of times a day. In the same way, this that I'm giving you is for a bit of brain brushing. If there's something deeper, there's something bigger, then you may very well need a professional to help you with that. So please understand the context in which this is being offered. And if you need more help, then please, as they say, if pain persists, see a doctor. Talk with a counselor, a psychologist, some therapist who can help you to find the help that you really need. So my friends, as we break now, I want you to examine your own thought life, your own feelings, and start to put this technique in, this tool into practice to begin to realign your thoughts and help your feelings, knowing that it takes practice. But keep at it.
How good was that? We hope you enjoyed that. Hope you took some notes, some takeaways, and we'll see you back here next week.